From the front pages of your newspapers to the front of your television screens, we bring you captivating stories and unpack the implications. And today we cast a spotlight to a shocking story that unfolds this week as police dismantle an alleged religious cult. Welcome to this week's edition of The Headliner, and my name is Curtly Gwindi. Taking a look deeper into this story, the leader, Ishmael Chokurongerwa, and 7 senior members were arrested on charges of child abuse and illegal burials under the belief of a so-called religious cult. Dozens of women and children were rescued from the alleged cult's farm, where authorities discovered a gravesite with secret burials, including 7 children. Join us shortly as we delve into this legal implication with regards to this story and exploring questions of human rights violations, taking a look at issues that surround child abuse, and once again the delayed police intervention that has finally brought justice to light. And of course, to help me unpack this and more, and obviously give more of a greater legal perspective, we are joined in studio today on The Headliner by Rufaro Deshe, a human rights legal expert, and who is already with me in studio, and of course also ready to break down these stories. Welcome to The Headliner, Rufaro.
Hi Curtly, thank you for having me.
Indeed, it is a pleasure to be bringing you in studio today, taking a look at all this and more. Perhaps give us a brief background or breakdown of your view and opinion of this story.
All right, thank you so much, Curtly, for that one. So I think generally, like what you've already alluded to, there's so many human rights violations that have stemmed from this whole situation. And it's so intricate because there are issues of the rights of people with regards to their rights to religion. How far can we allow them to practice their rights, and how far can we allow them to practice their rights to the extent that they infringe the rights of other people, the rights of vulnerable groups, especially women and children. So I think generally the issue here is that there needs to be a balance. When one person enjoys their rights, they can't enjoy their rights at the expense of the next person, because at the end of the day, the infringement of one right is the infringement of another. Human rights are interdependent. So you find that when one person's right is infringed, another person's right is infringed. So I think generally that would be the brief background that I'll then give to the situation at hand with regards to Matsbaba Ishmael's matter.
Fascinating indeed, and obviously we will be looking at all that and more. Thank you so much for your contribution. We'll go further, and as for now, as is our tradition in the first segment of The Headliner, we will take a look at some of the headlines that have been making the stand with regards to this week in review. And we kick-started off with the Daily News, which tagged Zim envoy after more USA trade, and as he ramps up Harare's economic diplomacy. And it goes like the recent partial removal of sanctions on Harare by Washington will help to lift trade relations between Zimbabwe and the United States of America. Zimbabwe's ambassador to the United States of America, Thaddeus Chifamba, also adds that the country will ramp up its efforts to foster a mutually beneficial partnership between the two. Now, obviously, we are on the backdrop of issues surrounding sanctions, and obviously giving greater depth with regards to currency issues, the multi-currency system that we are currently existing in, and obviously adding once again more weight to the issue of the lifting of sanctions and some of its implications. So we will be giving you a better insight with regards to that story as we proceed. We are taking a look at the headline with regards to the Herald, which tagged diplomatic ties can advance mutual interests, says President Emerson Mnangagwa. This was said by the president at a ceremony held at the State House, where he received letters of credence from incoming ambassadors of Uganda, Austria, Mauritania, Vietnam, and the Philippines. The Second Republic has been on a diplomatic offensive, thorough engagement and re-engagement drive, which has charmed the world. Now, of course, diplomacy itself has been playing a major role with regards to the foreign direct investment that Zimbabwe has been receiving. Obviously, also growing our gross domestic product at large, speaking loudly to the trek that the country has been on with regards to receiving and also consolidating an upper middle income economy by 2030. And this is also more popularly and affectionately known by the Zimbabweans as a Vision 2030. And most definitely, some of these diplomatic ties being at the helm of our success or some of the milestones that we're going to be reaching in Zimbabwe will play a major and critical role with regards to development of the country. And we move on to the Chronicle, where we take the headline from the city of Kings and Queens, which reads, "Let's take charge of the future." President Emerson Mnangagwa has said the dream of modernizing and industrializing Zimbabwe and the entire African continent will not be complete without incremental beneficiation of diamonds and other precious minerals, as well as embracing and investing new technologies and innovations, particularly by young people. Now, if you had been tracking some of the headliner episodes that we have brought you in this new fresh season of this year 2024, you do know that we have brought on young people who obviously are contributing to the GDP of the country, but at the same time are also able to speak very vibrantly with regards to some of the innovations technologically, even with regards to farming and industry itself, and more importantly, like this headline is tagged, mining. We do know that there is a huge chunk to play and a huge input that young people have to play with regards to innovations, perhaps beneficiation once again. And as the president has espoused in this headline, that there is a typical need for young people to be taking charge with regards to these spaces. So knowing that the backbone of the economy particularly involves and has a part to play with regards to some of these very, very pertinent and important positions with regards to industry, which is the farming industry, the mining at large, as well as transport and mechanization. And young people are being called to the helm of making sure that development happens, also coming up with technological innovations themselves. So a big kudos once again to the Second Republic for some of the innovation hubs that have been coming about with regards to different provincial spaces, and that's also speaking to devolution. And of course, those are the particular headlines we are tracking with regards to this week. But we now move on to the typical story of the day, and we are ensuring that we have some input with regards to our particular guest who's joining us today. And please stand by, as Rufaro Deshe, a legal expert, particularly with the space to do with human rights, is going to be contributing. Don't go anywhere. This is the headliner. Welcome back, viewers. This is indeed still the headliner, and if you are just joining us, you do not want to miss what we have in store for you as we look at a story today where Madzibaba Ishmael was arrested on allegations of human rights abuse through an alleged religious cult practiced at his farm. And police confirmed this incident, saying over 45 minors were found at the farm and 27 were sexually abused after medical tests were done. Some children have children already and are yet still below the age of 16. First and foremost, Rufaro, thank you for staying with us on the headliner.
Thank you for having me again, Curtly.
Yes, very riveting news. I think it's diabolical. Someone would think that this is something that's out of the ordinary with regards to some of the spaces that we've interacted in and maybe the everyday Zimbabwean sees. And how would you say some of these things come about, or are they even real, first and foremost?
I guess this is not a situation that is unique to Zimbabwe. I think it's been said often that religion can sometimes be the opium of the people. and it just has this ability to sometimes cloud people's judgment and put them in a space where they don't know how to separate right from wrong. I think it's very sad, especially to the extent where we have minority groups and vulnerable people who then can't be protected by religion or by the custodians of whatever cultures or moral upbringing of sorts. So I think that's the issue there that I can see.
Okay, and in your view, look at this. Some of the statistics are actually quite, heartbreaking with regards to some of the children coming about having been sexually abused.
Yeah.
Now, what's next from a legal standpoint? What will happen to, because we understand it's not just Madzibaba Ishmael himself.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's his whole entourage, his fellow cult followers, some of them who are in leadership positions. How best can you say, or what's the worst outcome with regards to what's been happening now?
So the worst outcome for me is that, like what you've said, it's not only one person. He has obviously groomed some people who will come after him. Even you find that we might have some children who will be groomed to have that same line of thought and that same line of thinking. So if an example is not made out of Madzibaba Ishmael and those who are following him, and if no proper investigations are made to ensure that all the people who are particularly involved in this particular case are brought to book, it means that there's no deterrent feature from the law, and it means that people will feel that they can get away with it and they can continue, practicing these human rights infringements. So I think to that extent, it's so important that an example is made out of Madzibaba Ishmael and the people who follow him and the people who follow his doctrine.
Okay, and with regards to doctrine versus law, religion versus law, there's always a rift there. Let's steer the conversation in that direction. Perhaps let's talk about the protection of the rights of the woman and children themselves, particularly perhaps paying focus and attention to abuse within families and communities in these so-called religious cults.
Yeah.
Do we have laws that guide or perhaps direct us to an understanding of what can then be the outcome, as you rightly said?
All right, thank you. So we've had very progressive laws that have been made in Zimbabwe with regards to the protection of women and the protection of children. Because you find that these are groups that have been marginalized for a long time. These are groups that have been forgotten for a long time. So there's been a deliberate attempt to make sure that their rights are protected. So you find that our Constitution of Zimbabwe, which is the supreme law of the country, in Section 80 protects the rights of women, and it states that women should not be subjected to any human rights infringements due to culture or customs or traditions. So any traditions or cultures or religions that infringe human rights are void to the extent that they infringe those human rights. And these human rights are obviously the rights to health, the rights to freedom of conscience, the right to freedom of assembly, the right to participate in whatever processes that they want to participate in as women. So these rights, as long as these cultures and traditions infringe these rights, it means they are void at the end of the day. So you have your sexual reproductive health rights. They're supposed to be protected under that because they fall under the right to health. And if I have it on good record that with these sects, sometimes women are not allowed to go through their birth control, get contraception and all of that, because it's against their religious culture and the religious beliefs. So to the extent that culture and religion or tradition is being used to infringe these women's rights, it then means that these things are supposed to be void. So that's with regards to women. And then with regards to children, and it's so close to my heart because it's so sad. Sometimes with adults, it's difficult for you to make an intervention for an adult who has made a decision for themselves.
Absolutely. I was going to say that some of these individuals willingly did it. From a legal perspective,
exactly.
You've given consent, rightfully so.
Yeah.
Perhaps expand further on that.
Yes. So maybe let me just go to the issue of the children. They don't have the right, the ability to make decisions for themselves because they are minors. They are under someone else. So someone else decides how they want to bring up their child with regards to the morality, with regards to the religion, the tradition. Parents actually have the right the Constitution of Zimbabwe gives to everyone the right to freedom of conscience. So under this freedom of conscience, what it entails is that you have the right to choose your own religion, you have the right to live the way you want to live, basically. But then what the Constitution also then does is it comes in and it seeks to protect the rights of children because of situations like this. So our Constitution then goes on to say, while parents have the right to bring up their children in the manner that they want to, they can't do that in as far as it affects their right to health, their right to education, and their right to security. So these are the safeguards that the Constitution has put in place to protect children, because like I said, they're vulnerable and they form part of so many vulnerable groups in Zimbabwe and even in the world over. So this is what the Constitution says. But it goes further to then protect the rights of children in Section 81, where it says that children have the right to be protected from sexual exploitation, from being used as child laborers. And even in Madzibaba Ishmael's case, we've heard that he has a whole system going where children work and they're being used, for labor to make sure they produce whatever is being used in that community with regards to the food and all of that. But it's at the expense of their right to education, their right to health, because they are not allowed to go to school. I personally saw a video where he was saying that we do not subscribe to Caesar's type of education because it's not in line with our culture and our beliefs and our religion. Yes. So to that extent, again, they're actually infringing the rights of children with regards to their rights to education, to health, yes, and to security generally. And then you also find that we have a Children's Act in Zimbabwe, a Children's Amendment Act, which is very comprehensive in how it deals with the rights of children and the protection of children in general. So you find that this act also puts responsibility on the state to ensure that it respects, it promotes, it protects the rights of children, and it forwards them so that people know that children have these rights. Sometimes people might feel like because I gave birth to this child, I have so many rights.
They feel entitlement over the child.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Alright.
I've even heard statements like vana zvidhina tinovaka zvimwe, and stuff like that. So when that is coming out from a parent, you don't know the extent to which they will then go to make sure that they control the lives of these children.
Yeah, and
So
it borderlines on even making a child seem like a material.
exactly.
Yeah, and perhaps you then start to think and wonder in some of these societies, maybe the moral high ground is lost, like you've rightly put, and rightfully so. Perhaps let's take a step deeper and try and perhaps interrogate what the legal obligations of the systems and authorities we have in place currently. Obviously giving your legal insight and perspective in terms of investigating and the intervention process. Take us through that, particularly to do with the cases of child abuse as well as exploitation.
All right, thank you so much. So like I said, we have a Children's Amendment Act which seeks to protect children. We have the Constitution. Zimbabwe is a signatory to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Children. It's also a signatory to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the rights and the welfare of the child. So, all of these pieces of legislation and law speak towards the fact that states have an obligation to make sure that they protect the rights of children, because children are vulnerable, like I've said countless times. They are not able to make some certain decisions for themselves, and sometimes those who have the responsibility to do so do not use their responsibility properly or wisely. So in as far as the state, it has the right, it has the obligation to make sure that it protects children, it promotes their rights. In promoting, that means that we need to ensure that our communities are aware of children's rights and what violations consist of children when it comes to children, because the state does not operate in a silo. They can't be everywhere every time. So when Kirtley sees a violation and does not report it, sometimes there's no way of making sure that they know and they can take the necessary steps to make sure that they investigate these matters and they bring perpetrators to book. Yes, exactly. But again, we have several laws. Like recently, our president put in place the temporary measures on children's protection. I think what that was meant to do was to just clear the air, because there had been a judgment from our courts where they outlawed child marriages and said legislators should then come forward and put up an act which protects the right of children. But this had been taking a bit of some time. So the presidential temporary measures also then comes in with the penalties that are supposed to be given to people who are found guilty of having sex with a young person. And previously it used to be at 16 they could give consent or not, but now there's nothing like that. A young person is one who's below the age of 18, period. So you can't then come forward and say that they were 16 years old and they had consented. And the issue of consent now, again, you can't come and say they had consented.
It's unjustifiable.
Exactly. You can't justify that anymore. So you can't come and say they had. So these are stringent and deterrent laws that have been put in place to ensure that children are protected. However, the SI by the president, it's a temporary measure, so it's supposed to lapse after 6 months. But I know that Parliament is also now trying to fast track and make sure that there's a bill that is going forward to protect the rights of children, especially with regards to sexual exploitation. Because with situations like what has been happening in Mazbaba Ishmael's sect, these issues are rampant. If a child does not have a birth certificate, Kirtley, how do you tell how old that child is?
Yeah, I was going to get into that, aside from the whole implications of some of the sexual issues that have been raised within this particular case. Let's pay our attention a little bit to, what that whole fiasco was. Because that's a whole, you were telling me about previously just coming from a, birth registration campaign that you were doing earlier on. Let's talk a little bit more about the idea of the figure and statistic of children who, out of the amount that were actually suffering, sexual, the implications of some of the things that were happening as a result of the cult. And some of them actually did not have birth certificates. And that then puts someone with no identity, no bigger picture as to where their heritage is from, no bigger picture as to perhaps where who they answer to, who knows who the actual mother is by registration. What does the law say about the failure to register the birth of a child? And if not so, the termination of a birth certificate, what does the law say about that?
All right, thank you. So I think I'll just start with asking, how do we enforce laws to protect children when we do not know that these people are children? I think that's a question that we can just pose to our audience and to people in general. You can't enforce laws that protect children when you do not know that this certain group of people are children. So what Mazbaba Ishmael did is that he then made sure that these children became invisible. So they're invisible to the government. They're invisible to the community. So we start from there. And the Constitution, again, in Section 81, says it's a right of every child to be registered. So it's a right for every child to have a birth certificate at the end of the day. A birth certificate is an official document which the state uses for planning purposes, to protect children, and all of that. So if a child doesn't have that, it means first and foremost they're invisible. We don't know that they exist. So how do we then protect this child at the end of the day? We have the Births and Deaths Registration Act, which makes it mandatory for people to ensure that they register the births of their children, whether the child has been born in a clinic or at home. So they actually separate provisions as to how it's done when a child is born at home or when a child is born at the clinic, what is needed, the documents that are needed, and all of that. So you find that at the end of the day, as long as a child doesn't have that that document, we can't protect them, we can't provide for them as a country, as a nation. And it's up to community and society to know that this child or this group of children are being subjected to these kind of conditions and report those matters. Because as long as it doesn't come forward and the state doesn't know about it, of course they do have a duty to, we have the census that is done. Those are processes that are supposed to then, bring out these issues and find out what's going on. So in the previous census, it was actually noted that in Zimbabwe, of the people that are not registered and don't have birth certificate, 60% of them are children. So imagine, it means only 40% of children generally have birth certificates. So if 60% don't have birth certificates, and we have cults like this that safeguard and they do not even want to hear anything about children getting birth certificates, and it's just a document to be fair.
Truly and fairly,
And
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And it's free to get a birth certificate from 0 to 6 years old. Imagine, from the time you nurture a child from 0 to 6 and you don't find a chance to go and make sure that your child has an official document that will help them to be recognized, already it means that they can't go to school. Their right to education is then is taken away from them.
Absolutely.
Yes, because when they go to school, they need to be identified. When they write exams, their ZIMSEC exams, they have to be identified. That's why you find that these children are actually not going to school at the end of the day. Yes. So these are some of the issues around that. We hope so.
Rufaro Deshe, a legal expert with regards to human rights issues. Such a pleasure to be having you in studio today.
Thank you, Kurt B.
Yes, we appreciate your contribution here on The Headliner. And of course, this is your go-to place for these kind of stories and more. You name the topic and we will talk about it. Remember that you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel. That is a ZBC News Online, where you'll be able to get your weekly dose of this fascinating as well as insightful show that we bring to you on a weekly basis here on ZBC. For now, we'll take the leave to be able to leave you for more viewing. And of course, from me, Kurt Gundi, the crew behind the scenes, all of us at the Pocket Hill Studios here in Harare, Zimbabwe. It is a pleasant viewing, and God bless Zimbabwe.